companies that are utilizing it to help drive are the ones that are much more transformational and having more success.
Hey, what's up YouTube? Welcome back to the next PL300 test prep question. Today we're going to be talking about how to connect Power BI into a Azure SQL Server database. And so as we connect into Azure SQL Server, we're going to have several options available to us. In a previous video, we talked about the difference between an imported table and a direct query table. Remember that import is going to be living inside of Power BI. It's going to be a static table that we're going to have to schedule a refresh in order to update the latest data. And a direct query table is essentially a live connection to our data. So as the database gets updated, so does our Power BI report as well. And we're not going to have to schedule that refresh because of the direct connection using direct query. So today we're going to start in the Power BI desktop to show you how to connect to Azure SQL Server and the options available within inside of that connection. Let's go ahead and get started. So here we are in the Power BI desktop, and the first thing I'm going to do is go up here to Get Data. I'm going to click the Get Data icon here to pull up a full list of our connectors. And once again, we're talking about Azure SQL Server, and so I'm simply going to search for Azure here. And we're going to see that that first connection here, the Azure SQL Server Database, is available. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the Azure SQL Database and go ahead and click Connect. Now it's going to ask us for the server and potentially the database as well. If you want to connect into your SQL Server database, you can specify a specific database, or you could just put in the server and it will give you a list of databases within inside of that server that you can choose from. We also have the option down here for data connectivity mode. Do we want to import this table? Remember, importing is going to be static. So anytime we use an import, this is going to be a static table. So it's not going to update unless we refresh. So with this import, we're going to have to schedule a refresh to bring in the latest data, and this could be done inside the Power BI service. And so we have two different options here. The other option that we have is the direct query mode. So remember that direct query is essentially a live connection to our data. And so this is not going to require a refresh. So this is going to be the latest data as it gets updated in the SQL Server database. It's going to update inside of your Power BI report as well. Now, additionally, if you look down here at the bottom, you're going to see some advanced options. So the advanced options area allows you to write a SQL script against the database to pull in specific information rather than just pulling in an entire table. So let's go and take a look at that. So I'm going to click advanced options here. And notice here we can put in a SQL statement. So you can write a SQL statement against the database to pull in specific columns that you want to, and different where clauses to essentially modify and limit the information that's being pulled in. And this is extremely helpful as typically you're going to have very large tables and you don't want to pull in all of the information. Additionally, if you look here, we also have what's known as a command timeout. So this is where you can set a time limit in minutes. And so if the SQL script that you write or the database connection does not connect in a specific time frame, it will time out. And so you can set this to whatever time frame that you want it to run. So let's say 60 minutes. If it doesn't return a value within 60 minutes, then it's going to time out. But this allows you to essentially minimize how long it's going to take to try to hit that database. And so the command timeout is just allowing you to specify how long it's going to try to connect to that data. So now that we have an understanding of the different pieces of connecting to a SQL Server database, let's take a look at our test prep question. It says you have an Azure SQL database that contains sales transactions. The database is updated frequently. You need to generate reports from the data to detect fraudulent transactions. The data must be visible within 5 minutes of an update. How should you configure the data connection? And so as we think about how we're going to access this data, let's look at some of the important pieces here within inside of the question. And so one of the most important pieces that we need to recognize is that the data needs to be visible within 5 minutes of an update. So this is very frequently. And so inside the Power BI service, depending upon the license that you have, you can either update 8 times a day or 48 with premium. Now, inside the service, you can only update every 30 minutes. That's the minimum amount of time that you're going to be able to schedule a refresh inside of the Power BI service. So because of that, with this saying that it needs to be available within 5 minutes of an update, this tells us that this connection needs to be a direct query. And so anytime you have a report that needs to be updated very frequently, that's going to be when we're going to be using that direct query method of connecting to our data. And so it's asking, how should we configure the connection? So let's look at our answer choices here. So it says add a SQL statement. Well, we could definitely add a SQL statement to our connection, but that is not going to determine how frequently it updates. So yes, you can add a SQL statement, but this is not going to help us get the latest data inside of that connection. We also talked about setting the command timeout in minutes. So once again, what that does is it just says, okay, after a certain amount of time, it's going to time out. And so while yes, we could set this to a 5-minute timeout, that's not going to determine how frequently this data source is going to update. And so this would not be the correct answer. The third option is to set the data connectivity mode to import. So as we set this to import, remember that with an imported table, you can only schedule a refresh in the service at 30-minute increments. So schedule at 30-minute increments. So yes, we could set this to import, but we could only refresh inside the service every 30 minutes. And so our goal here, it says that we need to have the latest data within 5 minutes of an update. So because of that 5-minute parameter where we have to have the latest data, our correct answer choice is going to be D. Set the data connectivity mode to direct query. This is essentially a live connection to our data. So as that SQL Server database is updated, so is our Power BI report as well. I want to thank you so much for joining me. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more content. I'll see you in the next one.